Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Good afternoon. Welcome to CSIS. My name is Jim Lewis. We're at an event today called Policy Issues for Telecom Transformation. This is done in partnership with the Information Technology Industry Council, and we're looking at the move to beyond 5G at this point, really to 6G, and what that will mean for the US and others. The transition creates new challenges for policymakers in supply chain, spectrum, and infrastructure. We did pretty well as a country in managing the challenges with 5G, but there's more ahead. For this discussion, we will have opening remarks by Congressman Mike Doyle, Chairman of the House Energy Commerce Subcommittee on Communications and Technology. He'll be followed by Rob Blair, Senior Director for 5G and External Affairs at Microsoft. Thanks, Rob, for joining. Danielle Kriz, Senior Director, Global Policy, Palo Alto Networks. Also thanks. Dr. Cheryl Janko, Vice President, Advanced Technology Group at Ericsson. And last but not least, Cleet Johnson, who's a partner and also a Senior Fellow at CSIS, a partner at Wilkinson Barker Nauer. All of them, when you look at them, Rob, Cheryl, Cleet, all of them have a commerce background. So this is a commerce-heavy panel today, but I think we'll have a good discussion. The ground rules are pretty simple. They'll each talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and we'll follow this by discussion and questions and answers that you can submit from the audience if you want. So with that, why don't we go ahead and have Congressman Doyle open the session. Thank you.
Thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you to the Center for Strategic and International Studies for the invitation. It's good to be able to speak with you all today. You know, it's an understatement to say that technology is embedded in our lives today. I'm sure many of you have more than one phone in your pockets, have viewed multiple screens already today, and have used those devices for your jobs, to connect with friends, and watch videos or otherwise consume entertainment. Regardless of what we are using our devices for, it's increasingly clear that the use of technology is essential for our everyday lives. Our students must have devices and broadband connectivity to fully take advantage of their educational opportunities. Many more employees are working remotely due to COVID, and our businesses, factories, and transportation systems are fundamentally reliant on broadband and connected equipment. The private sector has done so much to move us forward, creating jobs and transforming our economy, and it's been truly amazing to watch. But of course, none of these things are happening in a vacuum. It is incumbent upon the federal government, all governments I'd argue, to enact policies that foster and make room for these innovations in businesses. So today, I want to give you an update on what the U.S. Congress has been doing on this front and the issues I've been focused on as chair of Communications and Technology Subcommittee. First, the quality of our communication networks means nothing to consumers who cannot access them. It is unacceptable consumers in the year 2021 lack adequate high-speed broadband at home. It's unacceptable that our students have had to sit in parking lots of fast food restaurants or outside their local library to connect to Wi-Fi. It's unacceptable that patients lack reliable upload speeds to talk to their healthcare providers. And it's unacceptable that we have millions of Americans who still struggle to pay their bills. And that is why Congress recently passed the largest single investment for broadband deployment and adoption in our nation's history. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is directly addressing these important issues and is finally putting the United States on the path to 100% connectivity. In the coming months, Congress will be working with the administration to ensure these programs roll out smoothly and function as intended. We passed the bill, but now we must oversee its implementation. We have to ensure that broadband is accessible and affordable for all Americans. Second, we must continue to effort to create environment for our networks to flourish. As you may know, I've been advancing the Spectrum Innovation Act to encourage the federal government to maximize the amount of mid-band spectrum available for consumer use. People are heavily dependent on their mobile phones today and upset when they lose service or their ability to connect to in-home devices and TVs or to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. And there are many other uses that consumers never even pause to wonder about how they work, like our garage door openers, baby monitors, and health trackers, for example. The average consumer probably hasn't thought of how wireless and spectrum-enabled technologies fuel businesses, bringing products to them faster and more efficiently. And that's not including all the indirect benefits spectrum policy enables. Whether or not we realize it, all of us have benefited from the rise of the app economy, whether as a consumer, employee, or entrepreneur. So spectrum policy, while not at the front of consumers' minds, is vitally important. The centerpiece of the Spectrum Innovation Act, the 3.1, the 3.45 band, has the coverage and the data transmitting capacity to bring new wireless broadband capacity online for consumers. Through the new infrastructure law, directs some reallocation of the band for private sector use, we must ensure maximum utilization of the band. And so the Spectrum Innovation Act builds on what Congress has done so far to really push the federal government to squeeze as much out of the band as possible for consumers. Which spectrum bands we reallocate and how much is crucial, but how we do so is as well. It's imperative that we reallocate spectrum through the long-standing policy processes that have proven successful in the past. Making a single spectrum stakeholder, an incumbent user, the final arbiter of reallocation decisions will almost certainly not lead to better outcomes for our country. There is no question that the operation of existing federal spectrum users are important and necessary, and that those operations must be protected. We aren't making more spectrum, and as much as consumers are using more data and demanding more spectrum to provide that capacity, so too are our federal agencies. But when we are balancing multiple public policy goals, no single stakeholder should have final say over the reallocation process. That's why my colleagues and I thought it was so important to re-emphasize the time-tested role of NTIA in coordination with the FCC and the White House in working together to make these decisions in an equitable fashion. I'm confident that with the input of all stakeholders, we can find a path forward that makes as much spectrum as possible available for consumer use, innovation, and economic activity, while also protecting important federal operations. I believe it would be worthwhile to provide additional guidance and oversight from Congress on these issues. The Energy and Commerce Committee has advanced legislation to require the FCC and the NTIA to update their memorandum of understanding on spectrum coordination. And there are other ideas worth exploring as well, such as how the Spectrum Reallocation Fund should be updated to give agencies more flexibility to make spectrum available to consumers. The federal government should also look to hire additional engineers and technical staff to grapple with these weedy issues. Smart federal policy on spectrum and relating policy areas will continue to be instrumental for creating a world where networks will continue to grow and technological advances make their way to consumers. Third and finally, we need to look ahead to what is over the horizon. As I mentioned before, Congress has just taken major action to bring high-speed connectivity to the entire nation. The networks funded by this effort are going to allow tremendous speeds for consumers and businesses. The number of connected devices is ready to explode. And we really must begin consideration of the policy implications of this right now. Since I started serving in Congress, I've watched wireless networks transform from the first iterations of digital technology to 3G, 4G, and now 5G networks, where we will see speeds of more than 1 gigabit. While these innovations have been extraordinary, the benefits haven't flowed to all Americans equally. Policy issues have arisen from this that have required congressional action and regulatory steps from the FCC. For Congress and other policymakers to be best positioned to address future issues, we need to consider the next generation, 6G wireless technology now. And I am proud that the House earlier this month passed the Future Networks Act that I introduced with Representatives Lucy McBeth and Bill Johnson. This bill would require the FCC to create a 6G task force to report on the possible uses, strengths, and limitations of 6G, including any supply chain, cybersecurity, or other limitations that will need to be addressed as this wireless technology evolves. Importantly, the task force would be comprised of a wide range of stakeholders, including members of Congress, industry, public interest groups, and representatives from every level of government, including tribes, and would lay the groundwork for policy considerations that will certainly arise. Such an approach is good forward-looking governance. I'm hopeful the Senate will consider this bill soon because companies are working fast on the next generation of networks. The sooner we begin to look at these issues ourselves, the more likely Congress and the country will be to have a policy framework in place that serves our businesses and consumers well. So as always with technology policy, there is plenty for Congress and the federal government to consider. American consumers and businesses will both benefit and come to rely on new innovations, and our government needs to do it all it can to create a framework that allows such activity to flourish. I'm confident that we will rise to the challenges ahead and have a brighter broadband future and continue America's technological leadership. Thank you for having me today.
Well, great. Thanks to Chairman Doyle for teeing up a lot of issues. He put a lot of things in front of us that we'll come back to in the Q&A session. Right now, we'll go through the panelists who are experts in their own right. I'm looking forward to hearing from them. First, Rob, if you'd like to begin.
Happy to. Thanks, Jim. It's always a challenge to follow a member of Congress who's done so much in this particular field, but I think he ended his remarks essentially where I want to begin mine. We're talking about the policymaking challenges and the regulatory challenges that 6G is likely to pose for policymakers around the world. And I think in order for us to have a reasonable discussion today, I might throw out a few trends that I see that I think are going to bound what the 6G technology ecosystem is likely to look like. Now, this is definitely a little bit of a crystal ball activity. And if my crystal ball were really good, I would be a lot wealthier than I am today. But I think that these trends are pretty self-evident, but talking about them a little bit and fleshing them out will give us a chance to really kind of kick them around later in the conversation. So first trend, obviously, society is going to have increased reliance upon technology. 6G as 5G is going to continue the greater integration in every aspect of society, our economy, our military systems, our critical infrastructure, of course, our communications, our social networking. But what we're seeing today will increase in ways and will hopefully improve in ways that we're having a tough time today even beginning to imagine. Now, as technology becomes more integrated in our societies and our economies and our defense systems, government will have an increasingly legitimate role to play in ensuring the trustworthiness of those technologies. There's often a fight between industry and government over the role of regulation. Within Microsoft, we certainly believe that governments have a role to play to responsibly regulate technologies. The question is, how do they do that? And that's really the focus of this conversation today. The second trend that I see is that the number of what I call networking permutations is going to go up. There's an explosion of new technologies that 5G and 6G are enabling. Network slicing, virtualized RAN, the growth of private and hybrid networks alongside public networks. All of these are pointing to a future in which the stack, the telecommunications stack for any consumer is likely to be built upon multiple technologies interconnecting in common interfaces, similar to what vRAN is growing into today, but it will expand, not exponentially, but greatly as new technologies come forward, as well as the number of actors within that stack. That will unlock both new efficiencies as well as new revenue streams, which will, I believe, drive the whole economic case for 6G. Now, while this does have the potential to unlock new revenue streams, it also increases the number of threats, the number of attack surfaces that cyber actors can take advantage of. So not only will the consequences of cyber attacks go up because these systems are so integrated in our societies, I believe the number of attacks, and potentially, depending on how industry and government works together, the likelihood of successful attacks will also go up. So taking all of these trends together, I believe that the ultimate the government could hope, any government could hope for, is to help reinforce the trustworthiness of technology, its security, its resilience, while at the same time maximizing the flexibility and innovation that new technology is going to unlock. The only way that we're going to maximize the probability of this being successful is by improving cooperation between governments and industry. On cybersecurity, industry is often the front line to both detect and fight cyber attacks. Government has come a long way over the last several years, some at CSIS, some at the Department of Commerce, some at the Department of Defense, but there's still a long way to go. So that's one area that I think that we should be exploring today, is how do governments and industry work together better on cybersecurity? And then secondly, how do government and industry work properly together on voluntary standards organizations? Resilience and trustworthiness really depend upon common standards that are built by true professionals, true experts in the field, while at the same time, the government does have a legitimate interest in making sure that the standards that are being promulgated support the values that each society is built upon. So that's a second area that I hope that we can begin to unpack a little bit today. With that, I'll stop and hand it back to my colleagues.
Great, thank you, Rob. That was a good lead into Danielle. So Danielle, please, it's your turn to speak.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jim, and thanks to CSIS and ITI for hosting them, and really appreciated the remarks by Chairman Doyle as well. So I'm Danielle Kriz with Palo Alto Networks. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the world's largest cybersecurity company in the world. We serve more than 80,000 enterprises and governments in 150 countries globally. Among our customers globally are many service providers, internet service providers, other telcos, many of which are investing in 5G. We also work with governments and enterprises around the world that are investing in 5G and building up their own private 5G networks. So we work with governments around the world on their telecommunications policies and 5G policies, and I'm sure soon their 6G policies. So my focus today, I think I'm going to build a little bit upon Robert's remarks, is really on cybersecurity. And by that, to be clear, there's been a lot of talk in Washington and elsewhere over the last few years about supplier diversity and supply chain. That's not the same as cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is much broader than that. And policymakers need to be looking more broadly at securing 5G and 6G networks. So in response to Jim's kind of question about what does it mean for 6G and what should we be doing in 6G, from a cybersecurity perspective, it's essentially the same as 5G, and it's expecting and promoting policies that encourage security to be built in from the ground up, whether you're building a 5G network, refreshing a 5G network, or building a new 6G network. And the Chairman Doyle focused a lot on consumers, which I think is very, very important. But there's a major difference for 5G, and it will be for 6G, from the previous generations, 3G, 4G. Those were arguably used by consumers, leveraged by consumers. 5G is different. It's a big change. It's largely going to be used by enterprises and by governments. for digital transformation. It's used by militaries and their military bases. 5G is being rolled out by utilities, by manufacturing, by fleet transportation. And the data that's going across 5G networks then is a lot more business critical. It might be government information, business intellectual property, consumer information. And so the security stakes, as Robert mentioned, the attack surface is much bigger. The stakes are much higher. So you have to have a different level of security and expectation than what was acceptable for 3G or 4G. With 4G, if my phone got bricked up, I'd be angry. I'd bring it back to the store and ask them to unlock it. That's one thing. But if you have an attack in 5G and it takes down a government network or gets into the U.S. Defense Department's, base, that's higher stakes. And so the security's got to be a different level. It's got to be enterprise grade security, meaning what would an enterprise expect? What would a government expect? Kind of looking at 6G, I think the reality is nobody knows yet what it is. It's primarily in academic research labs at this point. How it will impact real world applications. A lot of it's about high bandwidth, low latency, short distance communication. So I think we'll see it being used in factories, vehicle to roadway, for example. But there's so many use cases for it that we don't even know what they will be. It could be more automation, could be more integration with enterprises, could be more data. But the important thing is you need security to keep up with all of those opportunities and possibilities. So I think I'll kind of leave it with what that means for policymakers. I'll be quick here and want to talk more about it, but it means that they've got to focus on and expect very strong cybersecurity to be built in the 5G and 6G networks. So look forward to talking more about that.
Great, thank you, Danielle. I forgot to mention when I was introducing Cheryl that she was the lab director for NTI's Institute for Telecommunication Sciences, which is a lot of us are big fans of. And she led the Advanced Spectrum and Communications Test Network, which I've never fully understood, but please don't explain it now. Say what you were going to say. And that explains why you're in Boulder, though. I forgot that. So, but Cheryl, over to you, please.
Well, thanks, Jim. And I recently joined Ericsson as the vice president of their brand new advanced technology group. And so I want to just be clear that today I'm speaking on behalf of Ericsson and not in my role as SES for NTIA. However, definitely drawing from my NTIA experience working with Rob Blair and others at NTIA, and have a lot to say about data-driven policy and how important engineering is. The other piece that you'll all come to know about me is that I have a PhD in engineering, and so I come at everything from sort of this engineering perspective, at the sadness of many people, but nonetheless, I try to be that bridge between the policy and what I believe data can provide for us. So, my two colleagues, Rob and Danielle, just spoke about quite a number of things, and I couldn't agree more about society's reliance and vision for our country and for the globe as far as 5G and next G, 6G and beyond. And also the piece that Danielle brought in with regard to security being built into 5G. Well, a lot of things are built into 5G. 5G is a different animal than 4G, and that's what we see as exploding. In 2030, our society will have been shaped by 5G for about 10 years. Now, the other thing that maybe Rob can attest to is I live in the future. My whole brain is in the future. 2022 is over as far as I'm concerned. I'm moving ahead. And, there's new needs and services that we're going to have come by the time 2030 comes. And there's this push for more advanced technological tools. And we're going to, over this course of time, we're going to learn and innovate. And again, that's really one of my things that gets me up every day is how to innovate. What's the next thing? How can we do something that someone tells me I can't do, much like Rob may have told me when I was at the Department of Commerce. But, always about how to do it, right? And so the 5G standards development, improved capabilities, is so critical for our country. And Ericsson is a big player in the standards bodies throughout the globe. And the evolution of this 5G and the learning that we're doing is really fundamental as we define what is the next G. Danielle mentioned we don't know what 6G is. Well, in parallel, research is happening now on the on the exploration of 6G. There's the Power program from Northeastern University, recently announced Spectrum X that was awarded to Notre Dame. First time ever, NSF has awarded a spectrum-focused program. Of course, there's a new RINGS program, Resilient Intelligent Networks program out of NSF. So they're doing their part too, and industry with the DoD are definitely supporting that. So the RINGS program at NSF, if you go and look them up, there's a whole cadre of corporations as well as a DoD that was involved in that. In addition, the DoD has just launched the PATHS program with the National Spectrum Consortium. That's the something like partnering for the holistic support of spectrum and spectrum policy. I'll have to look up exactly what it stands for, but that's a fantastic initiative from the DoD CIO's office to really get input from corporations, academia, and whatnot. So these things are happening now, and all these policy pieces, these engineering pieces are going to feed 6G. So the vision for 6G is although it's evolving, it's this place where cyber and physical blend together, right? Where we have this world of sensing and action and experiences and that sort of this digital representation of the entire world. All the XR, VR stuff that I recently saw at Milcom was fabulous. And, here at Ericsson, we have our D15 lab that plays in that area too. So, we'll be able to experience in 6G human senses and convey them digitally over many, many distances and have this experience as if we were there. So if, God help us all, if COVID were in 6G time, the students would have more of a we are there together experience than they did this past couple of years during COVID. Intelligent machines will interact with our digital world and real connections, and the network platform will be intelligent and fully synchronized in this new era. So this limitless connectivity and this new compute fabric and edge compute, trustworthy systems and cognitive systems. Again, I'm an engineer, will all be formed into this 6G era. And we have to find a way, we have to, as a country, as corporations, we have to find a way to help our regulators, right? Not to see them as FCC or NTIA or, as roadblocks. We have to work with them to somehow help provide important data with which to make their decisions. And that's what I firmly and truly believe will make us have better policies in the future. Thanks, Jim.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. And I applaud you for resisting the impulse to say the word metaverse. You hinted at it. It's lurking behind, but we'll save that for a later session. Cleet, your turn.
You teed me up. Now I feel like I have to talk about the metaverse.
No.
No, well, thanks so much, Jim, and to Chairman Doyle and to Danielle, Rob, and Cheryl. For me, it's a great, in my day job as a lawyer at WBK, helping clients navigate the specifics and the details of these issues that are pertinent in 5G. It's nice to be able to take a big step back and in the role of CSIS fellow and talk about some of the big picture issues. I hesitate to say meta level issues, but the bigger picture issues that are pertinent to this transition ongoing in 5G and then looking ahead to 6G. So what I'd like to do is talk about one very big picture issue, namely the ongoing, I don't know if you call it a competition, but the struggle for the future between free market democracies and authoritarian governments. I think 5G and 6G are directly related to that. And then second, a seemingly niche issue, and this is something that Jim Lewis and I wrote about recently, about the regulation of spectrum and how that is pertinent to that future. So on that big picture issue, if you think about 3G and 4G connecting individuals to the internet through their mobile phones, what 5G is doing through much faster speeds, lower latency, is enabling in some cases, 100 times more devices to operate in the same spectrum. And what that means in reality is that it's just ubiquitous connectivity. So it's not just about the human being with his or her mobile device, but it's about various sensors. And here I'm speaking to you from rural Southern Appalachia, where there are connected sensors that assist in agriculture. Just for instance, at CES last week, John Deere had a 5G autonomous tractor on display. So it literally reaches everywhere. And this connectivity is going to change and create new efficiencies in our lives and in business opportunities and in governance efficiencies, et cetera. It's also going to create orders of magnitude more data that can be analyzed, including through artificial intelligence and machine learning and algorithms to do predictive technology that will have benefits and in other cases enable more social control. So that is and then just very briefly about 6G, and a number of people have said we don't even know what innovations it will bring. What we do know is that even higher orders of magnitude of lower latency and faster speeds, along with advances in augmented reality, virtual reality, computing in many cases through your glasses, powered by your eyeball movements, will where everybody's eyes act as cameras and video recorders. It's going to enable advances in imaging, presence technology, location awareness that are just literally unfathomable today. And it's going to be a more human-oriented network than has ever existed before. And frankly, I can't imagine it. So what does this all mean with regard to that free market democracy versus authoritarian command and control economy and society? Well, I think it can be simplified into one basic, concisely. I think we would say that free market democracies want to harness these innovations in order to empower individuals, businesses, enterprises to advance and make life more innovative, make life better from the standpoint of our values. Whereas authoritarian governments want to and presently are using those advances, particularly the AI-driven data analytics and predictive technologies, to enable more control of individuals and businesses. There's a lot there. I'll just leave that there. But to me, that is the big picture question of the future: is does this technology allow us to empower ourselves and control our own destiny, so to speak, or does it allow the controllers of the technology to control us and our businesses? The relevant to that is this niche issue of who regulates spectrum, which will be the enabler of all these applications. We've just seen a big above the fold news issue of FAA being concerned about 5G use of the C-band spectrum in such a way that might interfere with altimeters in airplanes, raising the specter of literally airplanes falling out of the sky. This is something that Jim and I wrote about recently. And to make a very long story short, there is no indication in science or engineering or in any of the 40 countries that operate communications in the C-band that's such an alarming or alarmist, depending on your perspective, alarming outcome might happen. There's no indication of it. And this is something that the two agencies that have worked on this over the past several years, including up to 17 years of studies, specifically the FCC, which regulates spectrum use for commercial applications, and NTIA, which regulates spectrum use for federal government applications. They have worked this out, and just as 5G is about to be commercially deployed, the FAA has come out with various warnings and further inquiries. The reason that this is important in the 5G and even more in the 6G world is that the more everything is connected, the more spectrum will be an issue. Inefficient use of spectrum, harmful interference will be an issue. And we have to have a clear governance approach to deciding how spectrum is used. Because if we don't, then literally every regulator in the federal government, and why not even in state governments, will start making their own harmful interference decisions, often subject to industry lobbies. And we cannot move forward into a 5G and 6G world in which free market democracies like the United States are leading the charge. If we're hamstrung by 20 different regulators regulating spectrum. So I've said a lot there, and hopefully we can dig into that quite a bit more, including the cybersecurity issues that others have raised. But bottom line, a big picture and small picture regulatory questions are at stake as we move into this 5G and later 6G world.
Great, thanks, Cleet. I actually have more questions than we have time, but we'll try and work through them. So bear that in mind when you're answering. Let me have sort of a simple one, and you can respond quickly if you can. Any reaction to Chairman Doyle's remarks, which I thought were very useful, but Rob, do we want to start with you? What do you think?
I thought he did a really good job of summarizing some of the political debates at this point about the allocation of the, $62 billion worth of funding that is beginning to be allocated to the states. Each state is going to have to figure out its own approach to allocating that funding. Yet the federal government and industry, for Microsoft, addressing the digital divide is a massive priority for us. We've got a whole program called Airband that's focused on doing just that. So we want to make sure that money gets allocated in a way that's most efficient and effective. I also think that there's a debate underway within Congress to decide what sort of technologies should be able to apply for that funding. Should all be wireline? Should there be wireless broadband access? In what parts of the world, the country, rural Appalachia is one. It's possible that wireless broadband would be a much more efficient way to get broadband to some of the hollers. I also live in Appalachia, but up here in Virginia, rather than trying to lay wire to a couple folks back in the hills. That's an ongoing debate, and I think that the Congressman did a very good job of bringing the social dimension into the technology discussion.
Great. Cheryl, Danielle, but Cheryl, why don't you go ahead? Yeah.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Rob. Definitely. I heard a lot from the Congressman about the need to enable the American people in these rural areas. And I come from upstate New York, which is very densely populated, but I've been in Colorado for longer than I'll let you know, many decades. And out here in the West is very different. It's very, very different thing. You don't think anything of driving 8 hours to go somewhere, whereas perhaps if you're in Virginia, 8 hours gets you almost the way to Florida. So, that coupled with the fact that the tribal lands out here in the West are just suffering. Okay, they're suffering from all types of things, but the tribal colleges and universities are doing a spectacular job of educating and getting the tribal people to really help enable new technologies on their lands. And this is sort of one of these hot button passionate issues of mine that I really see that these access to these broadband funds could help. And I know that social, aiming our technologies for Ericsson at social causes is really an important piece of what Ericsson does every day. I think that the app economy is really what's going to be launching things, and Doyle definitely spoke about that. So it's sort of like, what's under the hood of your car? I don't know, but I know that I can drive it. So it's like, what's under the hood of the app? I don't know, but I can do all these things. And so I took those two things away from Doyle's talk.
Danielle, anything on? And Cheryl, I was going to ask if you actually live in New Mexico, but Danielle, that's a joke. Don't worry about it. Danielle, do you have any views?
Yeah, I mean, one thing in addition to those other points he made, he mentioned that he is calling on the FCC to stand up a 6G task force to look at issues related to the rollout. And he mentioned that it would look at things including spectrum and cybersecurity. And so I think, kudos to that. I think getting that up and running now is important because, it is very, very nascent, but that's when you need to be thinking about that. The 6G is very, very nascent, but that's when you need to be thinking about policy issues, right? I think in the tech industry, we all know tech moves so fast that often policymakers come in way, way too late. And you need to be getting in early. So I think, making sure that, again, among all the issues that we'll focus on, cybersecurity has got to be one of the main ones, because if these new networks are not secure, then all the money that we spend to build them out is really not going to be worth anything, because the attackers will get in and the networks will not be secure themselves, and the users that use them will not be secure either. So I thought that was a great remark.
Cleet, anything?
Yeah. Just very briefly, I just agree with all three. Just to pick up on where Danielle left off, 5G is going to transform the cyber physical, the nexus between the cyber world and the physical world, and 6G is going to make that cyber physical nexus personal to every individual. And so the trust, the security, the authenticity of the information is crucial. It's not going to be quite. I just took my son to see Matrix Resurrections the other day. I don't know if 6G will be quite Neo and Trinity making their way through the virtual world of the Matrix. But it will be closer to that than anything we've ever experienced before. So the security and authenticity of the data that is traversing these networks, it will literally be in some cases a life or death issue.
Yeah, I think Cheryl brought up the idea that the 6G might let there be better transmission of physical or senses activities, and haptic technologies are something to look at. So it'll be much more exciting to watch movies once we move out a little further ahead. But Danielle raised something I was going to ask as the second question, which is the 6G task force, which we've all heard about. What do you think it should do? So why don't we start again? We'll do the same order, Rob. 6G task force, very early, as Danielle said. What would you focus on?
Well, the big concern that I've got right now, it's really about security, and we're going to, I think, keep coming back to that in this conversation. I think that U.S. policymakers are taking too narrow of a view of cybersecurity policy, that we need to do more international work. The biggest holdback I see right now for 6G is this growing demand for data nationalism. And it's virtually impossible to do an effective global cybersecurity approach when a lot of data is stopping at national lines or continent lines. There needs to be a greater appreciation of the importance for standards across national and regional borders, for a common perception of what is trust and what trust technology both is and isn't, and then common application processes, whether they be export control, common export control approaches or other approaches, to try to ensure that the technology that we have in areas that are working together truly meets the same standards of trust, resilience, and protection of the rights of the people that are involved in those countries. So it would be taking a more global view of the importance of security and policy rather than just a domestic approach.
Great, thanks. Danielle, do you want to hit that one?
Yeah, no, I thought that was a really good point. We can't be making our policies in a vacuum, right? I mean, I get Cleet's point that things are shaking out a little bit geopolitically in terms of, as Cleet put it, more democratic versus not parts of the world. But all that said, I mean, technology is global, telecom is global, cybersecurity is global, communications are global. And so to the extent possible, absolutely, whatever task force is set up within the FCC, it should be kind of as part of its mission is to coordinate with like-minded or just consistently with regulators around the world, because everybody is going to be looking at this issue. I think another thought, there's obviously the CSRIC, which is the official FCC advisory group that's been around for a very long time. I think we're in CSRIC 8 at this point, so probably almost 2 decades. Clete would be the expert on that. But they have technical working groups that look at issues right now in 5G, and so I just hope I want to make sure that if we set up a new task force on 6G, that it's somehow coordinated with any existing work on 5G and kind of building off that and leveraging a lot of the same expertise and information, because 6G obviously will be enabling different things than 5G, but it's building on them, right? So just making sure that it's all, we're not recreating the wheel, we're not having, asking industry to kind of get involved in multiple working groups and multiple task forces, which, I was a government official in a past life as well. Like many people on this panel, we appreciate governments creating task forces and asking for industry input and working groups and getting us involved, but sometimes there's too many. So, I'm sure that's not the intent by any means, but, kind of make sure this is all kind of working together cohesively so that we can best give our time and expertise to them.
Great. Cheryl?
Yes, that's a very complicated question, I think, Jim, for me. And but I think that any council that comes up on 6G has got to have some sort of agreement among the members of purity for intent. What is the intent of the task force or whatever we're calling it? And it's not necessarily to support one political party or the other. It's not necessarily to support the interests of a company or someone's pet project. And, certainly people have had careers that are built within the federal government on pet projects. But I think, if we really have a pure intent and, sort of this noble intent in going into that, I think that would go a long way. I believe in the power of the people, really. I think in addition, security has to be there. I think understanding sort of, the supply chain and what that may or may not do for us relative to that security piece is really important. So I think I'll leave it at that because I'll get on the soapbox if I go any further, and I don't want to. So.
Great. Clete, let me jump off script a little bit, and you can start with this one. But when I was listening, one of the things I thought was, this isn't a pet rock, but it qualifies almost as one. What's the policy delta between 5G and 6G? If we fix the policy issues in 5G, what's left? Can we even know what's left for 6G? So, Clete, why don't you start since I interrupted you and threw you?
No, it's actually a great.
What's the delta? Yeah.
That's a great, I will say with the caveat that we're just now entering the 5G world and we don't even know what innovations and use cases what unexpected or unpredicted innovations and use cases are going to come out of this 5G world. We certainly don't know, we can't anticipate all the innovations and use cases in the 6G world. So with that caveat, I do think that a lot of the issues that are raised in 5G, everything from standards to spectrum to the shift in computing and all the questions of data and privacy and ethical AI that 5G raises. In some ways it's just those policy issues are like, you might say that it's the issues that 5G raises, only more and more important, more complex, because it's a world that's more connected. I do think that because the 6G world, because of the issues of presence technology and location awareness, imaging, other things like this, is likely to take that to an individual privacy and individual, again, not to sound too grandiose, but the notion of consent for issues like opt-in and opt-out might be just obviated by the reality of a 5G world, where everything is part of the big data collection arena. So it's likely to have more of a personal privacy and personal autonomy of questions. But I think we need to start with, and this just to circle back to the question about the 6G task force, I just want to echo what everybody said about the importance of having this task force be holistic. And this is something I know Chairwoman Rosenworcel has tried to do and has done very well in a number of other issue areas, including with the CSRIC that Danielle mentioned, making it in some ways kind of a whole of government approach, bringing in all the key stakeholders in industry, civil society, even, but also in the federal government. And that is even more important when you talk about these spectrum issues, for instance, the FAA C-band question. And then as Rob and Cheryl indicated, making sure that we see this 5G and 6G world not as an America, US specific, jurisdiction specific world, but a world that is global, inherently global, and hopefully oriented around the free market, fair competition, free expression, the values that free market democracies promote. And that to the extent that we can make that the orientation of the 5G world and the 6G world, that's what I think we should be aiming at. So any task force should also include those like-minded governments and businesses based in those jurisdictions that believe in those values.
I've got 8 questions in 8 minutes, so we're just not going to be able to do it. And I apologize to some folks, but Rob, Cheryl, Danielle, did you want to add anything on that? The Delta policy Delta? No, okay. One question is, okay, so we've talked about new mechanisms for coordinating policy. Who should lead it, right? One candidate was OSTP. Another candidate was NSTAC, amazingly enough. Any views on who should lead this kind of effort, particularly if it's both R&D and security? Danielle, do you want to start with that one? Because I know you've done some work on this.
Wow. I don't.
And you're not bound. You're not bound by your remarks. So
I was going to say I don't want to start any interagency battles. So I think I'll be very careful here. I think, if it's R&D, it's important to realize that so much of the innovation and R&D is being done in industry, right? So how do you promote that? The government itself doesn't need to take the lead in all the R&D in 6G and 6G security by any means, but how can they, support companies that are doing this leading edge innovation? I think is very important, and I think that gets a much more holistic discussion. And again, it's something that Rob mentioned and Clee is, policies need to be globally workable, and we've had issues in the last couple of years where there's proposals for U.S. export controls and maybe technologies like AI or other things that could have unintended consequences that could end up harming the innovative capacity of R&D that's done here in the United States, right? And that also has to do with the Wassenaar, think of export controls and other things like that. So I think when we do put together this FCT task force, or anybody's thinking about 6G, or if we figure out which U.S. government agency should lead it, I think, I forgot who made this point, but it should absolutely be interagency, right? Because the FCC or OSTP or NSTAC out of the White House, they have areas of expertise, but they should be informed by, State Department, Commerce Department, all these other parts of the U.S. government that look at different angles of technology policy and international policy.
Cheryl, Rob, any views on this that you scared to share?
I'll wade in a little bit. I'm not going to incite any food fights among the interagency at this point, but I do think this is an area that Congress should look into at reorganizing and providing new authorities frankly, to the Commerce Department. And I've thought a lot about it, and Commerce is in need of an update. It has the elements of the expertise and the authorities and some of the new authorities that they have that were started by the previous administration and now continued through the Biden administration to be able to handle some of the big issues on technology competition and some of the international aspects that Cleet was talking about. They don't have the budget, they don't have the personnel, and they don't really have the R&D mandate that they would need in order to pull in that particular component. There are models, I think, that ARPA-E from the Department of Energy is a model that could be considered for the Commerce Department, and ARPA-T and ARPA-C, where they have a set of technology sectors that they have a limited amount of money to put in to be able to start seed projects that could grow into something. It could be semiconductors, it could be advanced computing technologies that they could really get a bump forward. But given what they currently have, they don't have the personnel or the authorities to really make a step in it, but neither does anybody else. I love my colleagues at OSTP. I think that the folks at the NSC do amazing work, but they're not operational agencies. They don't have the budget, the size, or frankly, the mandate to be able to do something. And one thing I learned from my time as international rep for telecommunication policy is that the White House is not the place to drive a major initiative like this. The White House is a place to provide guidance and perspective, but you need an agency home for it. And at this point, commerce is probably the best place for it.
I couldn't agree more on that. I mean, Commerce really needs to rethink some of its structure to meet not just 5G and 6G, but semiconductors, all the emerging technologies. Let's do a lightning round since we're almost out of time. Somebody asked, any predictions on the outcome of the 5G FAA versus service provider battle? That's another one you probably want to dodge. Sorry, but the one the part that we might be able to link back in is I think Congressman Doyle mentioned the Spectrum Reallocation Fund. And we used that in the past to get around some of these interference concerns with federal agencies. So anyone want to have a quick view on that? Cleet, you certainly have views. If you haven't said, oh, Cheryl's got a view. Let's let Cheryl go first. We know what you think, Cleet.
Yeah, that's right.
Cheryl.
Oh, you could go, Cleet. Yeah. So here's the thing: defining interference has to be done. The great Peter Tenhula from NTIA and FC previously before that and at the FCC, that was his calling card. And as an engineer who may or may not have been involved in the Legato decision, I can also attest that the world does not know how to define interference. So saying that, I would just say with any predictions with regard to altimeters, look what's happening in France, look what's happening next week, and we'll all get there. We'll all get there together. That's it.
Anyone else? No? Okay, final question. What's on your wish list for 6G? What would you want? If you could pick a couple things, what would you want to see? And you can't say 6G commission because we've already said that. So, Cleet, why don't we start with you? What's on your wish list?
I'll bring in the previous question and just my wish list is that, because I really think this is a fundamental threat to a coherent 6G world, is clarity with regard to the question of harmful interference and who in the U.S. government makes those decisions. If we can't get that right, then we can't have a 5G future. We can't have a 6G future. I do think the FAA C-band issue will be resolved hopefully by January 19th, and hopefully it is resolved. But that's my wish. My wish is that sets us on a path to getting this right over the long term.
Great. Danielle, wish list.
Well, from what I understand from some of our engineers, a lot of the research now on 6G is about the teleportation, about transporting information, and security is not in some of the first drafts. So my wish would be that we get that focus built in right now and start to integrate that into what we're designing for 6G so that we get it right from the beginning.
Great, thank you, Cheryl.
My wish is that I'm still working when quantum communications happens. I love it. I used to work for Honeywell Quantum. That's my wish.
I talked to the guy who's the head of the Chinese quantum satellite program. He's pretty good. He's the real deal. So I hope we get there first, but it's not gonna. It's definitely a race. So that's an interesting point. Rob, you got the last word.
Dangerous place to put me, because I'm gonna say two things. One, which is pretty straightforward. I want us to get this common conception of data governance worked out. We've got to figure out how data is going to be responsibly moved across country lines and regional lines while still preserving the sorts of privacies that our people really deserve. And so we need to get that figured out. But the second thing is a little out of left field. Sustainability. We need to have a better grasp of how energy supply to all of these sensors and all this computing technology and all of these servers, which are holding all of this data, which 6G and frankly 5G is going to be producing, how we can do it in a way that doesn't just destroy the environment. I'm very concerned about the carbon emissions that technology is already causing, and if projections for 6G are correct, we need a better solution than we currently have. So we haven't talked about that, but I think it's one of those unsolved problems that we really need to start paying more attention to.
I couldn't agree more. And it's shocking sometimes how much power these places use. But on that note, let me thank Chairman Doyle for his remarks. Let me thank our panelists, Cheryl, Danielle, Rob, and Cleet. And thank everyone for joining. We will have a recording of this on the web. There'll be more information, including the speakers' full bios. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.